Thank you for tuning in for the February 2019 edition of Forage Focus. Today's guest will be Mark Landefeld, the Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources in Monroe County. Stay tuned. Welcome to our February edition of Forage Focus. I'd like to introduce you to our guest today, Mark Landefeld, the Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources in Monroe County. Mark, how long have you been in Monroe County?
About 22 and a half years now. Started back in 1996, so been working there since then. Good place to work, I think. You know, we do have a lot of cow-calf operators in the county. We've had a few dairies. Unfortunately, over the years, the numbers of dairies, and it's decreasing everywhere. But we've gone from, when I first started, about 50 dairies of people that had dairy livestock, and we're now down to about 7 in the county. So it's been a huge decrease there. But there again, the beef cattle and the forage grazing and lambs and stuff like that, sheep, we're well suited for that here in Monroe County and Noble and the other southeastern counties here. Really good ground for us to do grazing of livestock.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the other interests that you have aside from forages and pasture?
I enjoy doing, and kind of part of my job is the natural resources portion. We do have a lot of timber harvest management, stuff like that in Monroe County. Pond situations and stuff like that. A lot of our landowners have ponds and end up with weed problems and different things going along there. We also have, of course, the oil and gas production. The last since 2010-11, that's really taken off, and we work with landowners and stuff on right-of-way agreements, leasing agreements and stuff like that. So those have all been part of it. Also have a good master gardener group and fruits and vegetables being grown. We have a Captain Produce auction, which is just north of the county and into Belmont County, but some of the growers do live in Monroe. So work with a lot of those guys on vegetable production and some fruit production like that. So just a lot of different variation things in the county to work with.
I think we have the best job that there is in agriculture, getting to interact with all the different producer groups and help them in various ways. Something that seems like everyone involved in agriculture has had to deal with in the past year and continuing into 2019 has been mud. Extremely high levels of moisture in our ecosystems. It's been difficult.
It sure has, and I just because I knew we were going to be taping this, what is this, 12th yesterday of February, and I looked at last year's. We think back at how bad last year was, but we're already at my place. We're already an inch and almost a quarter over in January and February the amount of rain we had last year in 2018. So I'm not sure what we're looking forward to as we go. Hopefully it'll dry up a little bit. We never want to get that drought situation. I always keep saying I would rather have to deal with wet pastures than dry pastures. But as Christine's saying, this mud issue, it's really been a problem since last year.
We've never really had a chance to dry out.
To dry out now.
It's been consistently rain after rain after rain in cloudy conditions,
sure,
high humidity, low wind. It's just...
And springs and stuff are developing in places where they've never been, wet spots in fields. I know guys that never did get hay out of some places in fields last year because the fields were just so wet they couldn't get to them. But it has caused real issues too. Well, not only with the hay production and some of that, the quality of the hay and the amount of hay. I mean, there's a lot of people right now looking for hay, needing hay because they didn't get, maybe that second or third crop off they expected last year. I know my place, even my stockpiled forage seemed to run out a lot faster this year. I just don't think there was quite the nutrients there in those plants that there would have been in other years had it been a little more dry. So I think those things all happen, but then the real issue then becomes, and we'll talk a little about some frost seeding here in just a bit, what's going on with these pastures? I mean, they're just, if you look around, anybody that's got livestock right now, they've got chewed up pastures, mud here and there, just a lot of places. And like you said, it just never really dried up that well back in the fall for some of the stockpile grassed areas that we had. So finally, you want to utilize that pasture, and if you do, before it really starts deteriorating badly there, even clear into December, the ground was so wet even then, not frozen like sometimes we normally get, and when you go in and allow those livestock to eat, graze that forage off, it causes pugging, and so now we've got some situations we're going to have to deal with.
So we know these conditions are bad for our forages, our pasture health in general. It's also not good for the animals themselves.
Sure.
We got a lot of people, they're going to be calving soon or lambing soon, and muddy, sloppy conditions are not what you want at that stage of life.
Yeah, we've had some calves and stuff. I've seen calves already on the ground, know people who have calves, and we've had some really cold temperatures, but those have been very few days that the ground's even been frozen already this year. So yeah, calving and stuff really causes problem with navel infections and so on and so forth, different things, scours and everything that they can get. We got some information we'll share with you, I think, but when we talk about the cows even in muddy conditions, some of those things right now as we get into, even minor amounts of mud that they have to continually walk through day after day, and I think that's what's caused a lot of the problem. I know we're feeding hay bales, and it just seems like they're going through them a lot faster. Everybody I talk to, same situation. It seems like the livestock are just eating more and more than they normally do. Well, I think it's because of all this mud and the extra energy they have to utilize to get everywhere they're going. Like I say, we'll probably share some information with you, but stuff that's like dew claw depth in mud, it takes around 7% more energy for that animal to just navigate on a daily basis. You start getting into the shin deep or maybe the hock, we're talking 14 to 20, 25% more energy requirement stuff for those animals, the nutrient requirements for them just to do their daily things.
Just to get to the bale
Get to and from the water into the bales to eat. So yeah, it's really causing a lot of stress on the animals, and I believe that's why they're really eating a lot more than we normally think.
Now, just to divert slightly, something that people could do to help if they're running out of hay would be to supplement with some other forms of feed. Of course, that has costs too, but in a situation like this, I mean, should you go ahead and splurge and get some additional grain and supplement?
Yeah, I think that'd be the thing to do. If you can't find hay and you realize that you're going to be short, you can start substituting now. A pound of grain's worth 2 or more of hay usually, and if you've got the capability, that's what most of our producers have a problem with. How do I feed the grain? I don't have troughs, or especially if you got large numbers of animals, and then where do you feed it? If you don't have a concrete pad or something, every time you bring them to that spot, maybe a day or two, and you're going to have to move it somewhere else. So, but yeah, feeding some grain would definitely be an option now. And I think we think about what the animals look like right now, the body condition scores. I think you really need to be taking a look at what the animals look like. If they're losing body condition right now, we've got another month or so of cold weather, month and a half, and we don't want those animals looking at like 4s now and slip another body condition score, because then we're going to have real problems with having those animals rebreed, and the amount of dollars that you're losing by not feeding. If those calves are not born healthy, have good milk, and grow well, you're losing. It's really hard to estimate the dollars you lose from nutritional problems with the livestock. You can calculate if I turn the bull in and the cow doesn't breed that first heat cycle. That's pretty easy to calculate if you're doing a $1.50 or whatever you're going to be per head per day or per pound of gain on that calf. But how much is it losing because you didn't get enough milk from mama? You didn't get the quality milk from mama. You had a really hard labor because mama doesn't have the nutrients she needs. So those numbers are really hard to put a pencil to, but I think guys will easily be able to get that money back by going ahead and making sure the cows have good nutrition and what they need, especially at this point.
we have a lot of people who have been trying to improve their winter feeding areas. What are some of the ways that they're going about that? We've talked about some in the past on the show. And there's multiple ways that you can go through them, whether you're private paying on your own or you're going through the EQIP program with NRCS. Heavy use pads are a common go-to.
Sure. Yeah, the heavy use pads are a very good item, I think, especially situations like we've got today. You can do concrete, or you can go in with a J-textile type fabric, lay that down, allows water to permeate down through, put limestone on top of that, maybe some larger size limestones, and then make those smaller, those 4s or whatever, and come on down to some bug dust or tailing, some people call them, on top of that, just so the cattle's feet are not punctured by those limestone. But you can make a nice firm pad using either of those methods. Now, make those large enough too that depending on if you were going to try to feed on the pad, and we have some numbers that we can always give people to help them size the pad accordingly to the number of feet or livestock that they're going to have on there. But we always get in a situation where if you're a spring calving cow herd, feed pads to me are only good for certain periods of time. Once those mamas start having calves, a feed pad is typically not the place to have them at that point in time, because you get all that manure, all that urine, and then as cows lay down, it covers their udders, and as calves try to start nursing, a feed pad then is not the place to have those calves. You hopefully maybe have some, if you could possibly still have some stockpiled pasture left that you saved. I know it's a research farm. They're really utilizing that technique, and the fact that they keep a complete field where they have stockpiled grass from last fall. Do not put any animals in there until they get ready to calve. And when they get ready to calve, then those mama cows go out on that fresh green pasture. It's not really so much green now, but it's a clean pasture, and they can forage from the stockpiled grass. They always put hay bales there too, and the calves are never in the mud. And if you can do that now, that's the ideal situation.
Something that might be slightly off topic would be the idea of unrolling the round bale versus feeding in a bale ring, especially when you have young calves.
Sure. Yeah, if you can unroll bales, if you have enough hay at this time of year, I think it's a way to, like you say, not put the bale in the rings. That's what causes the real mud. I call them mud magnets. When the cow walks up one time, she typically does not make mud then. It's when they're out and back, or this one pushes that one out, and 2 more walk in, and you've got multiple times in and out around those bale rings. That's where the mud occurs. Once you roll a bale down in a pasture, then they're out more like they're kind of grazing. They're all separated out because the bale's down over the hill. You may lose a little forage, that won't be consumed through the animal, but you really haven't lost because you're putting nutrients back in the soil from where those cows are pushing those stems and everything else down in the ground. And you can see it the following year. Lots of times, if you go back out where you roll bales down the hill, you can see right where that bale with the extra green grass that you get from those. So, yeah, unrolling bales would be a perfect thing too, as long as you have, enough hay
to last.
Enough to last, right?
Okay. So we've talked a bit about mud and the stress that puts on the animals, the stress it puts on you as a producer. Trying to designate sacrifice areas is something that everybody has done, but once you get to the point you've sacrificed so many areas, how do you go about starting to rehab those sacrifice areas, or just those pastures that have consistently been stressed?
Yeah, well, there's some different things we can do. Whether we need to go in and do a total renovation, that's one thing we got to look at. I think if we've taken those animals and tried to separate those out, some of them by maybe just the younger animals, or look at them by some of that body condition scoring we were talking before, we can probably reduce some of our problems by separating out, maybe just putting 10 or 12, enough to be able to feed at a feed ring maybe at one time to reduce some of that. But we've got the problem, so how do we start fixing it? Well, if it's a total renovation type thing and you've got just soupy mud, something's going to grow back next summer, right? But what is it going to be? Is it going to be the weeds that you don't want, the broadleafs and some of those other problems? Or should we go in and, either frost seed some things in, or just go in and wait till it dries up and take a seeder, a no-till seeder, and seed some new seed into those? And I think that's going to be the situation this year. Some places are torn up enough that they've been pugged up badly enough that I think we'll probably need to go in with either a disc and or a drag, knock some of those down so it's just not so rough, and then maybe wait until it gets dry enough to come through and do a no-till. Other areas, it's maybe not quite so bad. We can do the frost seeding, which we want to talk about. And it's not just the clovers and stuff the legumes that we can frost seed. We can frost seed some ryegrasses and different things into the pastures. We just have to realize if we're putting seeds together that the lighter, fluffier grass type seeds won't fly as far as our little dense clover seeds and stuff. So typically we'd want to not put those together in one mix. If you want to seed both of those, seed your grasses and or then come back, do your legumes, the smaller seeds, so that you get the right distance in your spacing as you're walking, spinning it on, or if you're riding a four-wheeler or whatever. But there's lots of things we can do with this frost seeding.
So as the term implies, frost seeding, we're still going to be in frost conditions when we're doing the actual planting. So what's kind of the best time frame for us in the southern part of Ohio to start frost seeding?
I think we're there. We're here like the middle of February. We're obviously going to probably have some cold weather and some frost if we have a normal spring, what's normal anymore.
Yeah.
But we need to have that. I always like to tell folks to get the seed, get it ready. As we heard at our Forage Grass Council last week, if you don't have your seed right now, you're not ready. You're not ready to frost seed. So get the seed, get it at the place, and start thinking about now getting it on the ground. I always like to try to get it down before those last frosts. You want more than just one frost after you seed it.
Why?
Because you need that ground to honeycomb, they call it, as it freezes the top of the ground, especially if we've got a little bit of bare soil, which is what we possibly need, and we've got enough of it usually this year, but you need some bare soil there that it honeycombs, it opens up a little bit, those small seeds fall into that, and as the ground freezes and thaws, it continues to open and close, open and close. We've got to get the seed in good contact with the soil if we want it to germinate and grow well for us. If it's laid on top of too much thatch or leftover ungrazed turf that's there, it's not going to get down into the soil and germinate and do what we want it to do.
Right. Just to touch again briefly on, you mentioned ryegrass. That's a fast germinating grass that can provide some quick soil cover and then help some with erosion prevention.
Right.
As the other grasses are starting to come out of dormancy and really start that green up. I've had people call and ask me questions with the frost seeding. How concerned do I need to be about rain events after this? If I get a big thunderstorm, which we've been getting in winter, how likely is it that my seed's going to all be washed away and then I need to do this again?
Yeah. I wouldn't want, if I know a big downpour is coming, I wouldn't want to go right ahead of that downpour. But the size of the seed and stuff that we're talking, if we've got some bare ground, which we've got lots of, and we got lots of plugged holes and stuff for seed, I don't think you're going to lose a lot to rain event. At least a more normal rain event where it's not just a downpour, a gully washer. And especially if we can get a frost or two in there, and once again, get that ground opening and closing. As soon as that seed gets in the soil a little bit, I'm not as concerned about it washing away. Like I say, I wouldn't do it right before a huge rain event, but if we can get it down, as we know it's going to get some cold temperatures at night, typically look ahead and see if we're going to get 2 or 3 freezing nights in a row, that would be the time. Anytime, now until, how far you want to push the pencil as we get into the spring. But I would go ahead and start thinking about it now or very first part of March.
Okay. So if you need more information about how to frost seed, we do have some fact sheets that are available that we can get to you through any of the county offices. Those links will also be provided at the end of the video, so we can get you assistance for that. Once you've done your frost seeding, what are some ways that you can evaluate, did I do a good job with this? It can be kind of hard to tell early on.
Yeah, I think one thing we need to always think about when we're talking about frost seeding, early on we mentioned about making sure we don't have a bunch of broadleaf weeds and stuff we want to get rid of. But I think we need to think in terms of, okay, why are we frost seeding? All right, are we frost seeding just because, yeah, we want to add some more legumes to our pastures? But are we frost seeding because all the legumes are eaten out of the pastures? If that's the situation, there's no use to put more seed in the soil for the livestock just to eat it out again if you're just continuously grazing and allowing them to eat what they want. If you're not doing some rotational stuff or keeping them out and doing making sure that those plants have enough time to regrow, rest periods. Frost seeding is probably not something you want to go ahead and spend money on now.
One of the things that would probably be really important too before you start would be to do a soil test, right?
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of times, as we start thinking about putting more seed on the soil, whether it's in a pasture or hayfield, we really need to know what our soil fertility levels are, because if we're trying to put plants back in, especially we're talking legume plants for the most part, we're trying to get those back so that we have those in our pastures. If our fertility is not there, if our pH is not up, we're kind of, trying to go about it the wrong way. We need to make sure we've taken some soil tests, and it doesn't have to be this year. If you've had them from a couple of years ago, that's fine. We recommend at least every 3 to 4 years, try to get those soil tests. And on pastures, we might even string it out a little longer than that, because we're putting lots of nutrients back on the field that we're not really taking off like we do in a hayfield.
Right.
So if you get the pH corrected right, your pastures may go well for a long period of time without doing some other things. But if you don't have the phosphorus and potassium stuff there that you need, those little plants are just going to have a tough time, especially when they're competing against those already established plants that are there, in that field. So get that pH up to somewhere in that 6.5 to maybe 6.8 would be good for any of the legumes. The phosphorus and potassium, get that phosphorus up, what is Christine, in the 40s someplace, maybe parts per million. Potassium and P and K, we want to get that K up to 155 to 200 maybe. There again, those would be ideal areas that we can get for our frost seedings if we can.
What about nitrogen? Is nitrogen a crucial nutrient when we're trying to establish legumes?
Usually not for the legumes. If you're going to do a brand new seeding, I would put something at starter maybe down. But with our fertility, we're going to have enough fertility, I think, there to get the plants started. And once these legume plants get going, they will produce typically their own nitrogen for not only themselves but the other plants that are around them. And that's why we always encourage using some of these newer varieties, the improved varieties of the clover, the red clovers and white clovers, because they've found, some of the research shows that they're producing a little more nitrogen to fix in the soil that the microbes can then use to help feed the plants. If we get into that somewhere in that 30-35% range, that's what the universities are saying, that if we get to that level, probably don't even need to actually be adding in nitrogen to some of those fields. It takes quite a bit of red clover and white clover to actually amass 30-35%. It looks like it's a lot more than that because of the broadleaves. But typically we don't need to add a lot. Now if we're talking a stockpiling situation again in the fall, that's a little different situation than our frost seeding would be now.
And in a hay situation, one of the things you'd want to watch is shading from other grasses in the canopy.
Sure. Yeah, we talked a lot about the pastures, putting those in and not having the pasture plants get too tall, because we're going to graze those at 8 to 10 inches typically anyhow, and back down to maybe 4 or 5, which is ideal for a frost seed. But guys want to a lot of times put clovers and stuff into a hayfield. Well, you go spend them on a hayfield this time of year or shortly after, and then what do? A lot of guys will let that first crop of hay get up to full height. Now you've got established grass plants shading out your little legume plants. It's not going to work very well. You're probably going to have your grass plant or your new legume plants germinate, and then you're going to kill them. So what you need to do in hay fields, I think, is make sure, one, you don't put any additional nitrogen on there to help the grasses grow. Mm-hmm. Try to keep the nitrogen off of those fields in the spring of the year. Come in early in May, as early as you possibly can get that first cutting of hay off. It might be short, and that's what you want, because you don't want those little legumes having to compete against that real tall, 30-inch grass, orchard grass stuff. So come in and do that. Or or even like we mentioned maybe before, come in after that second cutting possibly, or third cutting, and take a no-till drill and drill some seed in at that point, because you're not going to get the grass growth back. The competition's not going to be quite as bad as far as shading, especially in those hay fields. Maybe think about that in terms of putting those legumes in then, rather than in a frost seeding in a spring situation like we're going to be in now.
Those are all good points to consider. And so we've talked about reasons to frost seed, including that we've had bare soil due to soggy conditions. We want to improve the composition of our pasture. What other reasons might there be to start frost seeding?
Frost seeding, other things, will help. Typically, some of the research has shown, if you got, most of our pastures got lots of fescue. Okay, nobody's got pastures here that have fescue. So diluting the fescue, causing some of the endophyte problems, reducing some of those with red clovers or white clovers, any of the legumes, or the other grasses, as far as that's concerned, will help reduce some of those problems. And there again, if you can get more rate of gain out of the calves, better utilization of the cows, and that producing more milk all along the way, that's a benefit. Several studies have shown that cows have better conception rates. When you add legumes into the field, even some of the studies that they've done, adding legumes and allowing the clover plants to fix nitrogen and then allow other plants to grow, even those studies have shown that cows will have a better conception rate than adding nitrogen to the soil to get the same amount of nitrogen there that the plants will be. So adding clovers, adding legumes definitely increases not only the quality of the forage, the quantity of the forage, but also the livestock production itself.
And would you say that's pretty consistent with other types of livestock as well, besides cattle, also sheep and goats?
Yeah.
And do you think horse producers might be a little scared by what we're talking about with all of the legume incorporation, with concerns like bloat? Yeah,
horse producers would not, they don't want to hear what we're talking about right now. They don't particularly care for most of the clovers with the slobbers and stuff that the horses get. Sometimes it doesn't hurt them at all, but when you have just profuse amounts of water and moisture coming out, they don't like that. And I understand why. But they can eat legumes without, a lot of problem. I wouldn't want to turn them into a field like we would maybe our cattle. But there's other forages and stuff that they will utilize and stuff. But the horse people probably would not want to utilize and try to get near as many clovers and stuff in as what we would for our ruminant animals.
Right, I understand. So when we go shopping, we've talked about these improved varieties. We might want to look at a few different species. There's obviously differences between red clover and white clover, and then the varieties of each of those. And we've also talked about the microbial interactions that the legumes have. We need to make sure that the seed we're getting is inoculated, or that we can buy the inoculum for that, right? Yeah,
I think as we think about in terms of putting legumes, in the soil, if the soil doesn't have the inoculants already there from other clover plants of a similar species, we may need to have an inoculant there, which I would encourage everyone, when you're putting a legume in, whether it's clover, alfalfas, or the whites, reds, I would want to put that little bit of extra work into getting the inoculant on that seed. Get it from your manufacturer, whoever you're getting your seed from, they should have it. Put it on in the instructions the way that they're supposed to. And then a lot of the seed today, these newer varieties we're talking about, they're coming with a coating of the inoculant already on the seed. So it's easier for the producer, but realize you're actually purchasing a little less seed because you're purchasing inoculant, and it's going to cost you more as being coated on the seed, but it is very handy. You just put that in your hand seeder or your broadcast or whatever you're going to use. The thing we need to realize too is if we're using something in a drill or whatever, that coating actually takes up a lot of space. So it's if you're wanting a certain amount on pounds per acre or whatever, that inoculant probably is maybe up to half that amount. So you may need to double your rates or something like that if you're thinking about turning frost seed. And there again, frost seeding, how much you want to put on? Well, 3 to 5 pounds, I guess, in the spring, if you've already got some stuff there. If you don't have any clovers there at all, you might want to think about a little more than that. But 3 to 5 pounds is a good number to shoot for, and it won't, break the bank by putting that much on it at one time.
That's great. I think that we're almost out of time.
Okay.
So we want to again encourage you to utilize the fact sheets that we have available from Ohio State, and then also always reach out to your county extension offices if you have any questions related to what you've seen on the program today. You can also contact Mark or I directly if you have questions. Our email addresses will be displayed at the end of the program. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Oh,
really
thank
informative.
you.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Thanks.
Tune in next month for the March edition of Forage Focus.